Welcome to the Pint Glass Football Podcast.
Today, we'll tell you who the top 10 NFL coaches are going into 2024. Some of these names and where they're ranked might surprise you guys. I'm your host, Brad Fowler. What's up, PGF Nation? Joining me, like always, my co-host, Alex Higdon. Alex, what is going on?
73 days, Brad. 73 days until football.
Counting down the days like always, but we're going to keep you guys entertained, talking football, of course. If you haven't already, check out the YouTube channel because we've got exclusive content dropping over there. Of course, the newsletter with exclusive articles to keep you guys entertained. But this one's going to be a fun episode, Alex, because we decided to come up with the top 10 NFL coaches list going into 2024. Some of these names you're going to expect, but some of these I think are going to surprise you guys. And our lists, like I mentioned, are different. I'm going to start with number 10 on my list. And that's Dan Campbell of the Detroit Lions. Now, look, what makes Campbell one of the top NFL coaches in 2024 for me is really just his ability to unite his team and this coaching staff under one shared vision. He's built a culture in Detroit. And he's given this team a toughness and an identity. And let's face it, I think that really goes beyond the wins and losses, so to speak. I think it goes beyond the X's and O's to a certain degree, because this is a team that their only identity they've ever had was failure. And so what he's done in a short period of time is really pretty impressive. Plus, he has a great eye for picking talented coaches. Him and GM Brad Holmes have also teamed up to really do a great job finding guys in the draft who fit the type of player they want and guys that they want to build around. So Campbell cracks the top 10 for me.
People love when I'm wrong, whether it be on Twitter, whether it be from this podcast, or whether it be in shared spaces. So let me go on the record. Dan Campbell did last longer than I thought he would. I called him a rah-rah Rex Ryan type of coach, and I didn't think that style was long. So I can see the point there, and I actually do have Dan Campbell on my list, but you having him at 10, I'll save mine for when he comes up for me, but I have at 10, I have Zach Taylor from Cincinnati. What he did last year, losing Joe Burrow, he also lost T. Higgins for 6 games, and though he did only lose Jamar Chase for 1 game, but he did lose him. That was a team that could have gone off the cliff, but he kept that team together. To the point you made about Dan Campbell, I also have to give that to Zach Taylor. Still Joe Burrow you're losing, and you're going in with some, respectfully, no name named Jake Browning that no one had any film on, of course, but he was able to get this guy, coached him up. One of the things that we like about coaches, because this is really what coaching is about, being able to coach up guys to play to the level or even sometimes above the level what we think they are capable of. And I felt that he did that with this team, and he did that specifically with that quarterback.
Yeah, I like the Zach Taylor pick, and I like your points about what he was able to do last year, because I think that really showed how good of a coach he is when you lose your franchise quarterback. To be able to battle in that tough division and keep that team afloat, I think really speaks a lot about him and what type of coach he is. I think he's an underrated offensive mind in this league that doesn't get brought up when we talk about all these young coaches and these schemes and their play calling. Zach Taylor doesn't get mentioned a lot. I think he gets a little bit overlooked. And if you remember, Alex, last year we played a game on a few different episodes where we did underrated or overrated. And we talked about Zach Taylor, and we both said, look, this guy is underrated. I think that still might be the case. So I like that he made your list. Alex, at number 9 on my list is a guy that I know you're not too fond of as an NFL coach. Some of it is based on recent success, and some of it is based on resume. So for me, I had to get Sean Payton, Denver Broncos head coach, in at number 9, mostly built off of his resume. A .620 winning percentage, a former NFL coach of the year, a Super Bowl champ when they beat that Colts team that was led by Peyton Manning in his prime. This is a guy who resurrected Drew Brees, took his game to Hall of Fame heights. In 16 years as a head coach, he's never finished below 7-9, only 5 losing seasons in 16 years. Russell Wilson bounced back from his worst season ever to really play at a respectable level last year when he took over in Denver. Now he has to prove he can win at a high level without Drew Brees. And we've only seen one season of that so far. So we're going to find out these next couple seasons just how great of a coach Sean Payton actually is. But for me, I think the resume and what he's done in this league, I had to show him some respect and get him on this list.
So if you could insert booze here, please do so. Because you know how I feel about Sean Payton. Said it last year. I'm maintaining that he's in that overrated bucket. I know how people can feel about a person that they feel about, but if you don't like Mike McCarthy, you have to then explain to me, why do you like Sean Payton? Because they're the same person as far as I'm concerned. So I'll say that. But to the point that you made, I will reserve further judgment until I see what he does with Bo Nix, but definitely not a fan, and was intent on keeping him as far away from this list as possible. Anything that I had to say about it. With him being your number 9, I actually have Matt LaFleur of Green Bay, and I like what he did with this team. Actually, I love what he did with this team. The youngest team, well, maybe not the youngest anymore, given what Houston has done, but one of the youngest teams in this league. What he did in terms of coming over, moving on from the legendary Aaron Rodgers in that building, similar to what Mike McCarthy had to do, transitioning from Brett Favre over to Aaron Rodgers. He had to do the same thing with, a lot of heat, a lot of pressure on this young quarterback. They upped his money, and he, I will say, over-delivered, made the playoffs, and then they went on to make a lot of noise by beating the Cowboys. LaFleur is doing what he did with that very young team, that quarterback with immense pressure under him because he's playing for his quarterback career in Green Bay, and showing and proving that he belongs in Green Bay and that Matt LaFleur is the coach that we thought he was.
Number 8, Alex, I've got Mike McCarthy, Dallas Cowboys head coach. I can already hear people yelling into the speakers right now as they hear this. People are probably turning this podcast off as we speak. I can already hear the boos raining down as I mentioned Mike McCarthy at number 8. Somebody take this guy's mic away. I get it. I'll be the first to admit, look, I've been tough on Mike McCarthy at times on this podcast, and he has come up light in the playoffs with some pretty good teams. And there are times where he makes some questionable in-game decisions. But the bottom line is, this guy wins a lot of football games. He won a Super Bowl in Green Bay. I think he's maximized Dak Prescott as a quarterback. Look, I just don't think Dak has that extra gear that it takes to win consistently in big games. But yet we saw Dak have a career year last year with his offense and his play calling. People act like he's the village idiot, and I just think that narrative needs to stop.
Yeah, Brad, I actually have to agree with you. Mike McCarthy, and we actually talked about a little bit of pre-production. I said if I had to remove somebody from this list, because I did really want to put Mike McCarthy on this list, but I didn't. I opted to go with Zach Taylor, but I would have probably had Mike McCarthy at this same, probably at the same. Yeah, actually, I would. I would have had him at the same spot that you had him at in 8. So I'm not surprised at this list, although listeners will be. But I think Mike McCarthy, given all the adversity that he's had to deal with, and let's remember, Kellen Moore was a golden boy for Jerry Jones. He overspent to keep him in Dallas, and then moving on from him last year, you would have thought that he would have had a lot of pushback and there would have been a drop off in offense. Instead, Dak basically had his best statistical season across the board with Mike McCarthy at the helm, without a running game, and truly just really with one wide receiver and a tight end for the most part in that offense, and they were explosive. Another 12-5 season. I think a very underrated coach, to the point of my Sean Payton taking a very overrated coach, because they're the same person. So Mike McCarthy, if you have Sean Payton on this list, Mike McCarthy definitely deserves to be on this list, and I applaud you for having him over Sean Payton. Let my hate shine through, please. Moving on to number 8. To number 8. For myself, yes, you have McCarthy. I had DeMeco Ryans. Yes, he's a first-time coach. A lot of my list is really based on what I saw last year coming into this year. Not necessarily their full-on history, but simply what I'm projecting at going forward. So I do understand he's a first-time coach, and it does, those of you who know me personally, it does go against my narrative to talk about quarterbacks or even coaches in a first-time run because I think coaches and staffs are so important and there has to be consistency. But I like what D'Amico Ryans has done. He was an immediate impact with Houston coming in. They were 2-15 last year, but they ended up being 10-7 this year and a playoff berth when winning a playoff game. But I think what he did with CJ Stroud, that team, nobody really thought too much of that team, but I loved what this guy did and bringing the attitude and revamping every single thing around this team after going through the Deshaun Watson thing, the Bill O'Brien thing, the ownership. It was kind of shaky there. Jack used to be being a part of the team, and he has reinstated stability so far in Houston. And even if you look at what he created it to a point that he was able to attract two big-time available people, one being a free agent, Danielle Hunter, and then the trade for Stephon Diggs that wanted to come and play in this environment that he has now created, that they're now on the cusp of the Super Bowl bubble, so to speak.
Yeah, my only pushback on D'Amico Ryans, you touched on it there, just a small sample size, but that's really the only thing you could say negative about this guy. And look, I have a lot of takes and a lot of opinions on this podcast. It's kind of what we do, Alex, right? I'm going to hit on some. I'm going to miss on some. We both are. That's just the way this thing works. But I'm going to take a few victory laps here with D'Amico Ryans in the Houston Texans, because when he was a coaching candidate, we talked about all the coaching candidates that were out there. And I said, circle this guy's name. He's the best coaching candidate out of this group. And I also talked about how Houston was maybe the most overlooked job opening out there and how people were really not looking at this as a great job when I thought it really could be. It turned out to be the perfect marriage so far. He's done such a great job, and it doesn't hurt that they hit their first two picks out of the park and they already had some young pieces in place, but he has quickly turned this team into a young contender in the AFC, and I love what he's done there, so I don't really have a problem with it. At number 7 on my list was a guy that you also have on yours. I have him just a little higher. We mentioned him a minute ago, Matt LaFleur with the Green Bay Packers. And look, coming into last season, he probably would have been maybe a borderline top 10 guy on this list. What he did last year with the Packers kind of bumped him up further as far as how much respect I have for this guy. He's 56-27 career record in Green Bay. And if you go back to his first year, the Packers went 13-3. Over the next 2 seasons, they went 26-7 with Aaron Rodgers winning back-to-back MVPs. Last year, like I said, the Packers were one of the youngest playoff teams in NFL history. Jordan Love looked like a franchise quarterback in the second half of the season, and they blew the doors off of a veteran Cowboys team on the road as a big underdog. Now, he has had some disappointing playoff exits, but this guy can absolutely coach.
Again, similar to you with LaFleur at number 7, I actually have Dan Campbell. So you haters, see what I did? I did realize, and I am accepting of my faults, and I have him up higher on the list than most of you probably expected. But Dan Campbell, yes, he proved me wrong. He has his team ready to run through a brick wall. But there's no question about what Dan Campbell has done for this team. He has them headed in the right direction. He's changed the entire course of that franchise, I guess, since the 90s, you want to say, for the most part, since the Barry Sanders days. Let's just leave it at that. That they are, and they possibly, you know what, to be honest, they are in the Super Bowl bubble, because as going into this year, I can imagine they are a top 5 to 6 team.
Now, moving to number 6 on my list, this one I'm probably going to get some pushback for. I've got Jim Harbaugh, the new LA Chargers head coach. And look, Jim Harbaugh wins everywhere he goes. He took over a 1-11 Stanford program, and when he left, they were 12-1. He rebuilt a Michigan program that was 46-42 with the previous 2 coaches combined, and then went on to win a national title. He took over the 49ers when they hadn't finished above 500 in 9 years, and then went to 3 straight NFC championships and came up just short of a Super Bowl win. Now, even though he hasn't coached in the NFL since 2014, and I get why that probably is going to get some pushback here on this selection, he still has the 5th highest winning percentage in the NFL. Based on the track record with college and the NFL, I have a hard time thinking that Harbaugh doesn't instantly get this team back on track.
Though everything you said is true, here's my pushback on Jim Harbaugh. From people that I don't actually, and Brad, that have been in that building and around that staff, people that, and things that we've heard in the news, Jim Harbaugh is a nasty person, which is why his stint in the NFL only lasted so long, because of the upheaval that he turned in the building, even though he was very successful on the field. So, but everything you said about him is true when he came and touched that team. But the one thing I will say that's different from that San Francisco team was a young team, a very young defense that was already in place. But that team was the nucleus of that team. I think they had only won 4 games. They immediately went from 4-12 to 13-3 that next year. But that team was already set in place. But I think this is a very different team. It has a lot of veterans on it, and I'm not sure if that style of coaching that I believe, if we're just going to go off his resume, he's going to walk in there with. I'm not sure how that's going to take with those veterans. So I'm going to be keenly watching if he's worthy of being on this list.
Did you know that Pint Glass Football is more than just this podcast? We have an exclusive newsletter. Sign up for free at pintglassfootball.com to receive articles and insights delivered straight to your inbox. But wait, there's more. We're excited to announce our brand new YouTube channel. Not only can you listen to our podcast on YouTube, but you'll also find exclusive video content waiting for you. So hit the pause button right now and go subscribe to our newsletter, and hit that subscribe button on YouTube to stay connected with the latest football news and our exclusive content. Underdog Fantasy is the easiest place to play fantasy sports. We personally love the pick'em game. Just pick between 2 and 5 players to build a pick'em entry. Pick whether your favorite players will have a higher or lower stat total in this week's game for a chance to win big. You can win up to 20 times your money in a single night. Download the Underdog Fantasy app and sign up today with promo code PGF. That's promo code PGF to claim your special pick plus first-time deposit offer up to $250 in bonus cash. The official ticketing app of Pint Glass Football is now SeatGeek. I can't recommend them enough, guys. I've been using SeatGeek for years. You want to go to a game this season? SeatGeek is here to take the confusion out of buying tickets, making sure you get the best seats at the best prices. With SeatGeek, you'll never have to worry about overpaying for tickets again. How? They put a 0 to 10 score on each ticket, so you know you're getting a good deal. But here's the real game changer. You can get $20 off your first ticket purchase with the code PGFPOD. That's right, $20 off with code PGFPOD. This season, make every game day epic with SeatGeek. Download the SeatGeek app and remember to enter the code PGFPOD to grab your $20 discount.
At number 6, we do have a kindred spirit, except there's a little bit of a sibling rivalry going on here, because I have John Harbaugh of the Baltimore Ravens sitting there at number 6. This is a guy that came in. If Lamar Jackson isn't drafted, we're probably talking about some other insert name here for the coach of the Ravens. But since he's gotten Lamar Jackson, it's given new life to his coaching career. Would have him higher on this list, if not for whatever that was that we saw in the AFC Championship game, where they only ran the ball a total of maybe, I think, 4 times with the running backs and 6 times overall. But John Harbaugh consistently gets this team ready to play. I mean, obviously, Ozzie Newsome being I guess you could say, the godfather of orchestrating a lot what's there, but we do want to give respect to Eric DeCosta as well as John Harbaugh. But he has that team consistently ready to play. Those guys are always ready to play for him. And this is a guy that consistently goes through a lot of coaching staff changes, particularly on the defensive side. They're always being picked apart, whether it be for their GMs or someone in their front office per se. But he himself has been able to maintain and make the right coaching hires along with that front office to bring in the right person that's going to continue that defense moving forward. But I do give a lot of respect to John Harbaugh. believe he fully earned this number 6 slot from me.
At number 5, I have Mike Tomlin with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, look, he hasn't had a lot of recent playoff success. I think sometimes that overshadows just how good of a coach this guy is, because he's a 2-time AFC champion, a Super Bowl champion, and the only coach in NFL history to start a career with 17 straight winning seasons. Now, look, a lot of people want to talk about how a lot of these seasons were 8-8 or 9-7 and things like that. And I get that. They haven't all been great, but Tomlin has really kept that streak alive despite dealing with an aging Ben Roethlisberger, whose game really fell off his last 3 years in Pittsburgh, and quarterbacks like Kenny Pickett and Mason Rudolph. He even had a winning season with undrafted free agent Duck Hodges starting multiple games. We know how important the quarterback position is in this league, and he hasn't had a good one in a really long time. Factor in the division that he plays in, to the guy that you just talked about a minute ago and who I'll get to in a second, with John Harbaugh and the Ravens and how competitive that division has been over the years. It's pretty remarkable how consistent of a winner Mike Tomlin has been in this league.
It seems like there's a run on AFC North here because, we talked about Harbaugh, you just talked about Tomlin, but I also have Kevin Stefanski. Now, that name is a name that I think may shock a lot of people, but I'm a person that holds a lot of gravitas when it comes to coaches that do a lot with less. In this league where the quarterback is key here, and specifically when we talk about Cleveland, where everything is riding on the quarterback. Not saying that they don't have a great team, but because of the amount of draft capital and money they gave up for this player in Deshaun Watson, where he only played 6 games, you had to have Dorian Thompson-Robinson, PJ Walker, and Jeff Driscoll step in and then, go get Joe Flacco from mowing his lawn and off his couch drinking beers to come step in and go 4-1 down the stretch to lead this team to the playoffs and win 11 games last year. So starting 5 different quarterbacks in this division, specifically in this division, which is probably why we've had a run on these 3 guys here, is remarkable. But to do what he did last year, I have a lot of respect for Kevin Stefanski. That's why I have him at number 5.
And he was a guy that I had a really hard time leaving off the list. A guy that in only 3 years in Cleveland is already a 2-time NFL Coach of the Year. Pretty impressive stuff. Everything you said is completely valid. I think what kept him off the list for me is he's the only guy on my list that doesn't really have any true playoff success. He has only 1 postseason win. His career record is actually only 38-32. So he's been good for what he has, to your point, Alex, but I had a hard time putting him above a lot of these other guys who have Super Bowl titles and a lot of more postseason success. And maybe I put a little more weight in that, but as an X's and O's coach and what he's done, like I said, already being recognized as a 2-time Coach of the Year in such a short period of time, he's definitely a very, very good coach in this league. So that brings me to my number 4 coach, John Harbaugh of the Baltimore Ravens. Now, I had a hard time kind of choosing between him and Tomlin because I think they're very close as far as rankings. I think the one thing that separated Harbaugh ahead of Tomlin for me was just the more recent playoff success, where I mentioned Tomlin really hasn't had much the last few years, where John Harbaugh has, consistently had Baltimore knocking on the door, making some deep playoff runs, and we haven't seen that from Pittsburgh. Now, granted, John Harbaugh's had a much better quarterback situation, and that's certainly part of the equation here, but this is a guy with the Super Bowl ring. He was an NFL Coach of the Year, and he actually has the most playoff road wins in NFL history. Now, he won a Super Bowl with Joe Flacco, and I think that really holds some weight here because when Joe Flacco won that championship with Baltimore, this was in the middle of Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, and Ben Roethlisberger's prime in the AFC. He's also consistently hired high-level coaching staffs. That's something you mentioned, Alex. And he's kept Baltimore consistently as one of the best teams in the NFL since he's been there, while playing in the best division in the league. A great coach that I think sometimes is actually underrated when we talk about the best coaches in the NFL.
Number 4 is where I have Kyle Shanahan. The Shanahan tree, let's just talk about the Shanahan tree for a minute. And I'm not going to go through any names. I'm just talking about the father. We know what his coaching offspring is, but then his actual offspring coming in and being this high level of a coach, being deemed a quarterback guru. Those of us, if you want to go back to what he did in Houston when Matt Schwab had him lead the league in passing that one year that he was there, he's pretty much been an offensive guru. The things that he was able to do, going and seeing what he was able to do with RG3, going, like I said, and seeing what he did with Matt Schwab, making Matt Ryan an MVP and helping orchestrate, helping that team to go to a Super Bowl, and now getting his own team and structuring it. He and John Lynch structuring it in a way that it's now in the Super Bowl bubble. It's basically been Super Bowl or bust for them the past two to 3 years, and now going into this year, it's again Super Bowl or bust. He is now set up to really have a run because he has his quarterback in place. He has his running back in place. We talked about the wide receiver situation and what could be going on there. We'll probably talk about it some more. If you haven't seen it, either go back to some of the pods or you can check out our YouTube as well. But this team is set up to really be good, at least I would say, for the next 4 to 5 years. But Shanahan's just been a consistent head coach, having his team well prepared. Now, you can talk about the mistakes, but we're just simply talking about getting his team into winning positions and in the playoffs and consistently getting to the NFC Championship game and now the Super Bowl twice now since he's been head coach. I think he's a guy that really could probably contend for number 1, but for me, I have him at number 4.
Yeah, Alex, and I've got Kyle Shanahan at number 3, so we're not too far off here. Everything you said is absolutely spot on, and it's amazing because if they don't blow a 10-point lead against the Chiefs the first time they play in the Super Bowl, if Jimmy Garoppolo completes that one open touchdown throw, if they get one stop in the fourth quarter or overtime in last year's Super Bowl, we could be talking about this guy completely differently if he was just able to get that ring. But he's still a young coach, and he still certainly has time to get there. And I think those who are skeptical, so to speak, of Shanahan are obviously going to point to the letdowns in the Super Bowl. And look, that's fair, but it's undeniable the impact he's had on his team's success. One of the best offensive minds in the game, one of the best play callers in the NFL. Almost half of the NFL offenses right now are running a version of his offense.
That brings me to number 3 and where I have Mike Tomlin. So we're in the crunch now where we're basically tit for tat on where these coaches land. Mike Tomlin, you spoke a lot about him before. I mean, we know about the consistency, but it's now just to the point where I think he's got this running like a well-oiled machine, but now he actually, since Ben has been on the downside, he's just been able, as a veteran quarterback, to push and grind out some things. But now I think he's sitting with 2 quarterbacks, whichever way they go, where I believe he's going to have success. Again, shameless plug, go to our YouTube. We talked about Pittsburgh and what our outlook is for them this year and what we think about their quarterback room. You can check that on our most recent YouTube posting. But I love what Mike Tomlin is doing. I like what the team has done in giving him these 2 weapons in terms of quarterbacks, finally putting some real equity into that quarterback room as Duck Hodges and Mason Rudolph and Mitch Trubisky and Kenny Smallhands, now really putting some things in place where they have some light and hope in that quarterback room that they can really start a real true quarterback battle. And to me, it really doesn't matter who wins that job. It's probably going to be for the best. But Mike Tomlin is going to have this team ready, and I think you're going to see a little bit more oomph, pause, from this team simply because that quarterback room is better. And side note, high fantasy alert for George Pickens this year.
Number 2 on my list is Sean McVay of the LA Rams. Look, one of the best offensive minds in the game. He overhauled this offense to fit this Rams roster last season. This is a guy who already has such a great resume, the youngest coach ever to win a Super Bowl at just 36 years old. McVay is also one of just 9 coaches with a 600-plus winning percentage in the regular season and playoff games over 5 seasons. So, unbelievable start to his career, but this is a guy who maximizes the players on his roster as well as any coach in the game. Now, I kind of debated between whether to put Shanahan or McVay at number 2 and which one at number 3. For me, the tiebreaker between these two was the Super Bowl ring. And I talked about how, unfortunately, Shanahan has came up light a few times in the Super Bowl. McVay obviously won one and lost one. And I think for me, that was kind of the tiebreaker, even though I did consider Shanahan based on the fact that Shanahan has really dominated their head-to-head matchups. But the Super Bowl chip was too much to ignore.
Similar to my Stefanski pick and my Mike Tomlin pick for having them so high, Sean McVay was an easy pick for me over Shanahan simply because, like I said before, I value when you do more with less. This is a guy who traded Jared Goff to get Matt Stafford, and just a year ago, or rather 2 summers ago, was trying to trade Matt Stafford to move on from him. This guy is shrewd. He knows what he wants. He knows what he's capable of. He has I guess you could say, a Bill Belichick-y mind where he's like, I'm going to move off of you before you just go fall flat on your face. Is probably what he was thinking when he thought about moving Matthew Stafford, 2 years or a year and a half removed from winning the Super Bowl. He was ready to move on from him, but instead kept him, settled the dust down. And not only that, he had to start a rookie running back. I don't know, some guy named Puka Nacua that nobody was aware of except them. If you saw that video of them when they were hoping and praying and maneuvering to make sure that they drafted him. And then you talk about Kobe Turner, you talk about Byron young guys on this team that flourished. And remember, they were a team that had given away a lot of first and second round picks. So they did a lot of this from the 3rd pick on in terms of what they were able to put together to make this team a successful 10-win team, to still keep them competitive in years before, but make them very competitive into a playoff team this year. And basically was what do we want to say, maybe a play or two from beating the Lions and possibly going on a run of their own. He's consistently, doesn't matter what he loses on the team, what he loses his coaching staff, he consistently remains that it's him that's stirring the pot here. And I think at number 1, Brad, I don't think this was pretty much of any fight for anybody. If you're fighting this, you know what? Tweet us. If you're fighting Andy Reid being the number 1 coach in the NFL, please, what's the tweet, Brad?
What's the PGF podcast?
Okay,
Alex is, if you guys haven't been checking out Twitter, he's the most hated man on Twitter currently right now.
Yes.
So if you want to tweet us, of course, at PGF podcast.
Right. So I don't know where the argument would come from anyone of Andy Reid not being the best coach. He really switched his team from being an offensive juggernaut to last year. And I like to take a victory lap myself. I had been saying since week 6 or 7 that Kansas City was the best defense in the league. And going into the playoffs and throughout the playoffs and then on the biggest stage, they showed why they were actually the best defense in the league from my standpoint. Being able to coach through that and then turning Patrick Mahomes. Yes, he did turn Patrick Mahomes into a game manager specifically in that Baltimore game. If you don't know what I'm talking about, go back and look at that game. Look how the Ravens shut them down in the second half and look at the plays that he had to make when he had to make them and meticulously move them up and down the field, not making any mistakes. I think Andy Reid is a chameleon. I think he is far and beyond now, and I don't think it's close. I like Sean McVay a lot. I don't think it's close. Andy Reid, number 1 coach in the NFL.
Yeah, this one's no debate. I think everybody knew this was going to be the name at the top of the list. The most innovative offensive play designer in NFL history. And I don't think there's really any doubt about it. This guy is just an unbelievable genius when it comes to designing plays and calling plays. Now with 3 Super Bowl rings, he's not only the best coach currently, he's entered the all-time NFL coaching list. And when it's all said and done, it's going to be really interesting to see where he ends up on that list. But what if he never gets Mahomes? Now, look, you could easily flip that, and you could say, what if Mahomes doesn't get Reid? And that's completely fair. But remember, before Mahomes, Reid was seen as a coach that couldn't win the big games. He got close several times in Philly, and he got the most out of Alex Smith, but it took an all-time great quarterback to come in and get him where he is now. Now, look, Bill Belichick, who many consider the GOAT, hasn't won anything without Brady. The greatest coaches of all time, when you look at that list, almost all of them had a great quarterback. So it's interesting when you factor that in, just how different this guy's resume has become since he's got Mahomes. But I don't want to take anything away from Andy Reid because I also, like I mentioned, I don't think Mahomes is the same guy without him. But what a 3 to 5 year window they've had here in Kansas City. It's been pretty incredible, and it doesn't look like it's slowing down anytime soon.
So, Brad, I told you early, but in pre-production, that I did have a question for you that I wanted to put you on the spot with this question. If Bill Belichick was in the NFL right now, where do you place him on this list? Or do you even place him on this list?
Yeah, he'd absolutely be on this list. He'd be a lock top 5 guy. And actually, I'd have a hard time putting him anywhere, probably even outside of the top 3. I know the lack of success after Brady has kind of hurt his resume, but I have to factor in just what this guy has done throughout his career, going all the way back to his coordinator days, winning championships with the New York Giants and Bill Parcells. This guy has been an all-time coach for so long. Kind of a weird way to see him exit the league. It was a little bit unexpected. The Patriots kind of fell apart. And I think really, and we've talked about this, Alex, I think it goes back to the fact that Bill Belichick, the GM, got Bill Belichick, the coach, fired. I think that's what makes his story so interesting, is that if we could separate those two, and if Bill Belichick was just willing to kind of get out of his own way and allow somebody to take over those duties and really work with a GM, it's amazing how much different these last couple of years could have been in New England. But with that being said, I did bake a lot of people's resume into my list. Now, this was going into 2024, obviously, when we came up with this list. So some recent success was definitely factored into my decision, but proven success, I still baked into my grades here in my rankings.
Yeah, I have to agree. Well, actually, I don't have to agree, but I agree he would have been on the list. But I probably slot him in at number 5. Again, I'm basing a lot on what I saw last year, and I know what I saw last year going into this year, that draft that they just had, that I think we really applauded. Again, all of our pods are available for our draft grades. He wouldn't have drafted the way that this new regime drafted, and I probably would have been a little bit more downtrodden. The GM Belichick always gets Coach Belichick in trouble, but however, his ability to coach, I can never deny it's unmatched for the most part. But I'm more than likely, just based on last year coming into this year, strictly just based on last year coming into this year, I probably would have had him around 4 or 5.
If you enjoy the podcast, do us a favor and subscribe, rate and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Once again, I'm Brad Fowler. He's Alex Higdon. This is Pint Glass Football, and we'll catch you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Pint Glass Football Podcast. Be sure to subscribe and follow us on Twitter at PGF Podcast.
Zencastr is the ultimate web-based podcasting solution. It provides high-quality audio and video podcast production and hosting. With a full suite of professional tools, podcasters can seamlessly record, produce, and publish studio-quality content all from one dashboard. Zencastr's post-production process takes the headache out of audio production. Set the right podcast loudness and levels while reducing background noise with a click of a button. Coordinating all your guests to record in person is painful and tedious. Easily invite up to 11 participants per recording with one click. Go to zencastr.com/pricing and use my code PGFP, and you'll get 30% off your first 3 months of Zencastr Professional. I want you to have the same easy experiences I do for all my podcasting and content needs. It's time to share your story.